Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Michael Wald. Thank you so much for joining me today on Ask the Blood Detective. Today we're going to continue our conversation about weight loss, specifically the weird and wacky weight loss solutions that I've uncovered over the last 30 years or so of my clinical nutrition practice. On some of the other shows that you can check out on the podcast, Ask the Blood Detective, you'll find what the role of heavy metals are and how they generate overweight and obesity, along with how hyperbaric oxygen or air therapy might be beneficial for losing weight, and of course, the role of inflammation. And today, I'll be speaking more about hormones. I do have at least one other podcast show on weight loss that covers many other aspects of weight loss, maybe the more common ones that you possibly have heard of, maybe not, maybe some additional ones there too. But these particular group of weight loss approaches, detoxing heavy metals, reducing inflammation, using hyperbaric to decrease low oxygen tension in cells and reduce inflammation. And now today, more about the hormones. So if you have experienced poor weight loss results, if you have tried a variety of things and you just simply cannot lose the weight, it might be because you have a problem with hormones. Keep in mind, though, that hormonal issues usually involve inflammatory issues, which usually involve oxidative stress issues, which usually involve poor oxygenation and toxic issues. So depending on your particular needs, is what I'm trying to say here, is that try not to think of hormones as the only thing. Hormones can be affected by and they can affect other aspects of your physiology that can be creating difficulties with your weight loss at this time. So this may be the time that you stop blaming yourself for having bad eating habits, although you may have bad eating habits, but sometimes it's not the eating, it's the hormones. And I found over the years of my practice that people will start experiencing weight gain issues when they have one or more hormones out of whack. Now, I probably should start this conversation by saying that hormone testing is not particularly accurate. There are some instances where hormone testing may be more or less useful for a person, but overall, and traditional endocrinologists and even regular physicians tend to acknowledge this fact that a hormone level in the blood doesn't tell you anything about the tissue's sensitivity to the hormone. So let's say that your testosterone level is a little high. You still might have weak musculature, let's say, and that could be because you're a bit testosterone insensitive. The receptors in the muscle tissues may not be fully recognizing the testosterone in the bloodstream. So the body actually increases the level of the testosterone to try to push through those receptors to make those receptors notice it. But depending on your body, that could work. But it also may cause a further hormone, and in this case, a testosterone resistance. So again, as the body increases the production of hormones, those receptors in the muscle tissues and receptors in other areas of the body for testosterone are there to regulate, to kind of taste the circulation of testosterone and regulate its influx into cells. So that's just one of the reasons why a level of a hormone cannot tell you about whether or not you're using it excessively or you're not getting enough use out of the hormone. But if you have, let's say, benign prostatic hypertrophy or enlargement of the prostate gland, and you happen to have a high testosterone level, that blood test would have relatively more importance and carries a greater potential connection to the condition of the enlarged prostate. So when I teach my lab courses, and I've said this in my laboratory book that I wrote, it's a 500-page lab textbook called the Anti-Aging Encyclopedia of Lab Tests. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a very big book. But I discuss in there how levels of hormones may not reflect usage by tissues due to this insensitivity receptor issue. So I'm not suggesting you run out and get a bunch of different hormones, obviously. How astute practitioners get a clue about what hormones may mean something for you is, as I mentioned, considering carefully what your health concerns are now and what potential hormone connections might be there, and then to interpret your lab tests relative to that. and then decide whether or not there's a connection or not. And then what I do is, besides a very detailed conversation with an individual covering the general health history and goals and that sort of thing, I utilize a number of hormonal questionnaires that, through that process, elucidates, sometimes extremely well, what hormone imbalances need to be worked on. Having said that, some of you will undoubtedly go out and get a bunch of hormone tests, and that is perfectly fine. Just be careful not to put too much weight in them. So let's begin by talking about what hormones actually are. So the term hormone itself refers to a certain class of chemicals in the body that are made naturally. In other words, endogenously, endogenous hormones. And then, of course, there are exogenous hormones, which are hormones that we get in the form of, let's say, hormone replacement therapy. Now, you're thinking, well, can I get natural hormones from outside the body? Yes. Natural hormones can be produced by using, let's say, soy products and wild yam, but they're not produced naturally from those natural products. Those natural products have to be used in a laboratory, and generally enzymes are supplied to convert precursors of hormones in the soy and in the wild yams to become hormones. So that's just a little technical point, that there are really no such thing as natural hormones per se. And I probably should mention, too, that just because hormones are said to be natural doesn't necessarily mean they're safer for you. I mean, first of all, there's very little evidence, a very little study overall, comparatively speaking, to endogenously produced hormones and also the medications, the exogenous hormones, and also looking at the so-called natural hormones and whether or not they're actually safer. They might be safer. My holistic common sense tells me they might be safer, particularly if they are made in the precise balance and type of hormone needed for the person. But that's a little bit beyond this conversation. You could search my website at drmichaelwald.com, and when you search for nutritional endocrinology, and you're going to find a very detailed, comprehensive show about hormones and testing and all of this kind of stuff. We're going to talk more about the practical relationship of hormones to weight gain and problems losing weight. So as your body produces these endogenously produced hormones, or you take hormones from the outside, I'll just now talk about hormones in a general sense, they affect your metabolism, they certainly affect your mood, and they can affect reproduction. They are literally involved in hundreds of different reactions in the body. And it's also known that aging itself, due to one aging theory known as the hormone decline theory of aging, is a major theory of how human beings age. Basically, as we get older, we produce fewer hormones, and therefore that disturbs our normal homeostatic mechanisms and results in the types of aging and diseases that we see. Now, others argue that certain hormones, let's say like estradiol, should be reduced naturally as aging occurs, because estradiol is a potential cancer-causing agent for both breast cancer and, let's say, prostate cancer. And that's all very true. So it's up to the practitioner, and of course you as the healthcare consumer, to carefully consider whether or not you want to use natural or synthetic or nutritional methods, or even lifestyle methods such as exercise and sleep hygiene, for example, to manipulate your hormones. Although I don't think that one should assume that their declining hormones is naturally due to what you might call normal aging. I personally believe that there is very little normal aging going on due to our stress levels, our exposure to various electromagnetic and other forms of radiation, the fact that most of our diets are terrible, we're not exercising regularly, we have too much stress, we're not sleeping appropriately, we're taking all sorts of medications, we're not building our health, and for many other reasons, people just aren't aging normally. So if someone sees me and they're an older individual, let's say, or even someone in their 50s, I'm 55, so I just call myself an older person, but if I, for example, had a low level of DHEA hormone, which is an adrenal hormone, and I was also feeling tired and my joints were not healing properly, and I had maybe not the shortest memory that I've ever had, and my strength is diminishing, and my cholesterol is going up, I might benefit from DHEA hormone or testosterone hormone. And I might conclude, if I personally had bad health hygiene, let's say, that these hormone decreases are not natural for me. And then I might make the clinical decision to supplement myself or a patient in this particular instance. So it takes a little bit of clinical experience, common sense, and education to decide whether or not you want to actually affect a hormone's actual function in the body and or its level, either in the saliva or blood or wherever else you feel like checking it. So suffice it to say that maintaining the proper hormone balance for you, your health goals, your current health conditions is something that is very important, if not essential, to general health and well-being. Certainly is important for maintaining healthy weight and for losing weight. So let's start with a hormone that some of you might be familiar with if you have been thinking about hormones and weight loss, and that's leptin. So leptin, that's spelled Leptin, so that's a hormone that's released from the fat cells in the body. And it was discovered by researchers in, I think it was 1994, so very recently. And we've learned since then that it plays a vital role in regulating how your body uses energy, and compared to, or relevant, I should say, in relationship to your long-term and short-term food intake. So basically, what you need to know about leptin is that it works by helping to maintain proper body weight. So in that regard, leptin is often called the satiety hormone or the satiety hormone, because it signals your body when you're full, or at least it should do that. And it inhibits hunger because it tells your brain that you don't need any more energy. Now, if you have excessive fat cells, that can create quite a lot of leptin that tells your body to stop eating so you're not hungry. And in theory, that's a good thing, right? Because if you're not hungry, you're not going to overeat. If you're not going to overeat, you're not going to put on fat. But the problem with overproduction of leptin is very real and can cause a condition known as leptin resistance. Just like I was explaining with that testosterone example, or any hormone, most every hormone, with maybe the exception of growth hormone, and I'm not even so sure about that, is susceptible to hormone resistance. So if your body is making too much of any hormone, your body wants to regulate how your cells and tissues use that hormone. So it might take the receptors for that hormone and what's called downregulate them so that they only allow in some of the hormone's effects. And then if the hormone levels, folks, for example, are low, I'm going to say that again. If your hormone levels are low, your receptors might actually increase their receptivity to the hormone. So you might have a low testosterone level, as an example, or a low leptin level, and you might get the opposite effects of low. You might get high effects in the cells because the tissues are opening up those receptors, allowing greater use of the hormone. So I hope that makes sense. More hormone downregulates hormone receptors. Less hormone upregulates the receptors in general. But of course, there are exceptions to that rule. So back to leptin and this concept of leptin resistance. So if your sensitivity to leptin is decreased, let's say because your body's making too much leptin, your body will not be responding or listening to that hormone, and you may continue eating as a result. The exact opposite effect that you want from the leptin. And if you want more fat cells, all you need to do, it's quite easy is you need to eat more. Now, I should back up for a moment and remind you that there are lots of different factors that will influence your weight loss and influence your weight gain. And that will include stress, exercise, diet, sleep. Those are obviously big ones there. And any of these factors and others can affect the levels of leptin and other hormones in the body. And if these lifestyle factors, again, diet, exercise, sleep, stress, are in such imbalance, they will cause various imbalances of hormones and by and large result in weight gain. So that's a short story about leptin. Now let's talk about the pancreas. So if you're eating lots of refined and processed foods, or you're exposed to too much pollution and toxins, those things enter the bloodstream, and they may trigger the pancreas to produce more than the amount of insulin that it normally needs. And what's going to happen when that hormone increases? What may happen if that's a chronic problem is your body may downregulate the receptor sensitivity to insulin, in effect causing insulin resistance. So improper eating, eating refined and processed foods, eating in an irregular way, eating the wrong food choices and the wrong combinations, and other non-food factors can all lend themselves to insulin resistance. And that tends to involve years of insulin spikes, which pave the way for degenerative conditions such as type 2 diabetes. So now let's transgress a little bit to stress and the hormone cortisol. And you may have read and seen commercials, and there's a lot of press, and there always has been on how cortisol and the stress response and weight gain are connected. And, we need cortisol as a survival hormone. It's involved in what's known as the stress response. But as you might imagine, if your stress levels are too high, or if your lifestyle is just chronically moving all the time and has this chronic level of underlying stress, that's going to stress out the adrenal glands, which produce the cortisol. And you might start producing more cortisol over time, which might produce more belly fat, as an example, and more inflammation and oxidative stress, all the wrong things when it comes to weight gain. So using nutrition and improving your lifestyle to improve how your body's resiliency to manage stress is extremely important. I just had a conversation with a patient this morning, and I was trying to make clear that I did not feel that extreme dietary measures was the proper approach for her weight loss. Her lifestyle clearly is way too stressful. She lives off stress. So through my life skills or life coaching part of my practice, I work with people to identify these stressors and to develop proper coping mechanisms to then cause a better, more balanced stress response in the body, which will reduce cortisol, which will reduce insulin resistance, which reduces the breakdown of lean body mass, and again, all the positive things that you want when cortisol is kept under control. But there are some other ways to affect cortisol. So one I mentioned is managing stress, but not just hearing that superficially and say, yeah, I know it's stress, but to actually structure your life or to restructure your life such that you minimize the stress. Perhaps we'll cover those during another conversation, but suffice it to say that if you're stressed out, that's going to tell your adrenals to pump up the cortisol, and that's going to cause insulin resistance and inflammation and weight gain. Now, some of you come in with tests of cortisol levels, and you show me that they're actually low. Well, low cortisol can also result in weight gain, and it could also be the result of many years of elevated cortisol levels. Then the body's adrenals just give out, and you develop this hypoadrenal condition or weak adrenal condition of low cortisol. And then that, again, is not good for various other reasons. So you just can't get away, more or less, depending on you and your particular stress in your life, of managing the role of stress and proper coping mechanisms. You can also eat more healthy, obviously, and eat much lower down in the food chain, either a plant-based diet or a vegan-based diet or a vegetarian diet, and then have that diet adjusted to include the rest of your health issues, and that might help to balance out cortisol, along with leptin and even testosterone. Again, we're going to cover that in a second. And again, specific food choices and nutritional supplements can help build the adrenal glands up. I'll talk about the supplements at the end of the conversation. So let's talk about the role of testosterone. Now, testosterone is a hormone that is found in both men and women, but it's more commonly associated with men because men have much higher levels of testosterone than women, just as women have higher levels of estrogen than men. And testosterone is important, obviously, for both men and women. And to just speak of men for a moment, in terms of sex drive, bone growth and density, muscle mass and strength and reaction time, the appearance of body hair. And there are many other important attributes that are promoted with the presence of testosterone. And you've probably guessed that testosterone does play a role more or less in men and women in terms of weight gain. So both high levels of testosterone and also low levels of testosterone can result in abnormal weight gain. Now, remember what I said about hormone resistance. If testosterone or any other hormone is increased, the body may eventually reduce the receptivity or the sensitivity of the cells to the hormone. So your blood levels or your saliva levels might look perfectly fine, but your receptors may have changed their receptivity, and therefore the tissues are acting differently than the levels suggest. So if you're someone that says to me, well, I visited my endocrinologist and they said that my thyroid hormone levels are just fine, but I have constipation and I am depressed, my skin, hair, and nail quality is poor, and you rattle off a bunch of hypo or low thyroid symptoms, but you've just told me that your blood levels of thyroid hormones are normal or high. The reason for that is thyroid hormone resistance, most likely. So I hope that makes some sense. And if you have low testosterone or normal testosterone but testosterone resistance, you're going to lose lean muscle mass. If you lose lean muscle mass, you're going to have a reduced basal metabolic rate. And if you have a reduced basal metabolic rate, you're going to put on fat. Plain and simple. And now let's segue from testosterone to another very important hormone that's kind of popular right now. People are talking about it in terms of our appetites, is ghrelin. That's spelled Ghrelin, ghrelin. So I mentioned that leptin tells us to stop eating. Ghrelin lets us know when we should start eating. So that's why it's known as the hunger hormone. It's produced in the gastrointestinal tract, and it signals the body when it's time to eat food. It also will tell your physiology when you should conserve energy. So what you need to know is that ghrelin regulates your appetite. Now, its levels, like other hormones, by the way, folks, are fluctuating all the time. You just don't want dramatic fluctuations happening on a regular basis. But when you get a blood test or a saliva test or a urine test of hormones, you're just looking at it in one dimension. But hormones are not one-dimensional. So as ghrelin hormone fluctuates throughout the day, it increases when we get hungry, and the levels of ghrelin should drop after we eat meals. And sometimes the fluctuating levels of ghrelin are not this straightforward because, improper sleep, for example, or stress can also affect hormones and affect how your body responds to your emotionality during meals. And other factors can also affect ghrelin, but I'm trying to simplify this here in a practical. So if we now accept that ghrelin affects your appetite and therefore your hunger levels, a decrease in this hormone, in ghrelin, would, at least theoretically, reduce your desire to eat, making weight loss a lot easier. And you should know that ghrelin also is involved in insulin regulation and even other activities in the body, such as sexual behavior. So these hormones, although I'm speaking about ghrelin in terms of appetite and weight, it does have other effects, just like all of these hormones I'm speaking about today. And speaking of yet another hormone, let's talk about insulin. So insulin is a hormone that is normally produced by the pancreas. So the pancreas is a hormone-secreting organ, and it's a digestive enzyme-secreting organ. So the pancreas beta cells secrete insulin. So if you have a virus, or you have a gluten intolerance, or you have a toxin like pollution that adversely degenerates the beta cells of the pancreas, you're going to have insulin production problems. If those factors or other factors affected the hormone secreting portion of the pancreas, you're going to have problems producing either and or all protein, fat, and starch digesting enzymes like the lipases, proteases, and the amylases secreted by the pancreas. But we're going to limit this conversation to the insulin's production by the pancreas. So every food you eat, folks, whether it's a protein, whether it's a fat or a carbohydrate, will eventually be converted into glucose. And that's when, along this process, the pancreas releases insulin. And insulin is fundamental to ensure that your blood sugar levels, or your blood sugar, I should say, that enters your liver for energy are managed properly. And if your insulin and pancreas is, functioning properly, if you should have low insulin levels, which happen, let's say, if you haven't eaten for a few hours, that will trigger your liver to release blood sugar from its glycogen stores. So this is part of the regulation of how your blood sugar levels are affected and affect insulin. And if these fluctuations, particularly the hyperinsulinemic states, persist, they promote inflammation, they promote oxidative stress, they turn on all the wrong genes, as I've mentioned many times, and will result in fat accumulation. Okay, so let's transgress now to estrogen. So we had talked about testosterone before as being the male hormone, more predominant in terms of amounts in men, and estrogen being higher levels in women. So given that, estrogen has many essential functions in the body. Just a couple would include building strong bones and regulating mood and behavior. And when estrogen levels start to decline, usually during the menopausal years, but they can decline prior to that, we're going to get a decrease in metabolic rate as well, because estrogen increases metabolic rate. But if you have a lower level of estrogen, that will lead to hormonal weight gain and what is commonly referred to as menopausal weight gain. Now, maybe your body's reducing its estradiol, which is one form of estrogen that's involved in fat burning, because your body feels that higher levels of estradiol might increase your risk of, let's say, breast cancer or ovarian cancer. So that's why lots of women, their bodies, with their innate intelligence, tends to lower estrogen. So they may be protected somewhat from breast and ovarian cancer risk, but they are not happy because now they have an increased risk of all sorts of diseases, including cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, arthritis, from the higher levels of estrogen, which tend to, actually not higher, but I meant to say the lower levels of estrogen, which is associated with a decrease in metabolic rate. Now, it's important to know that natural therapies that support the adrenal glands could help this issue, because the adrenal glands are responsible for producing about 20% of the body's estrogen. So you want to reduce the fat stores in the body because they're loaded with estrogen. But there's all this inflammation resulting from the fat stores. So any weight loss effect you might get from excessive estrogen is counterbalanced by the inflammatory effect of having so much fat on the body. But various herbs, for example, and or hormones themselves, and absolutely changes in the nutritional composition of the diet, including the macronutrition, the protein, carbs, and fats, can and do affect estrogen output and other hormone output by the adrenal glands that might be beneficial, particularly in the area of fat burning. So to give you sort of a concise summary of some of the considerations for weight loss relative to hormones would be, number one, see someone who has experience with the nutritional management of hormones if you want to do things naturally. And again, I direct you to my nutritional endocrinology radio show that you can find at drmichaelwald.com. And again, look at the other podcasts. You'll see other hormone-related shows as well. But you want to stick with whole foods, barring any sensitivities you may have or other valid reasons for avoiding certain whole foods. But whole foods, in generally, are the non-processed foods that are energy-dense. They have very low processing to no processing. They don't have added fat, sugar, salt. And by doing that, you're going to favorably affect most of these hormones if they can be affected by your food intake. You absolutely want to take a look at your portion sizes and monitor your caloric intake carefully, because if you should pay attention to your perception of your fullness and your hunger and eat appropriately for that, you can regulate or re-regulate a lot of these hormonal patterns that have been stressed out due to your, being unaware of these factors for most of your life. And then incorporating various forms of fasting might also be appropriate. Whether it's long, 14-hour fasts or shorter ones, which don't include, let's say, grazing. Again, one size does not fit all. So I recommend fasting in certain ways for certain individuals, given the entire picture that I see. So sometimes I think it's important to fast. Sometimes I think it's not. Sometimes it's shorter fasts, longer fasts, or short and longer fasts that are used interchangeably as needed as I check certain lab tests, which, by the way, might include some hormone tests, but I have mentioned some of their limitations earlier on in this show and in other shows. But there are other factors nutritionally I may want to check that are accurate to check on blood, let's say like a vitamin D3 level. The lower your level of vitamin D, the higher your risk of overall body inflammation. And that's true of lots of different nutritional supplement issues and deficiencies. You must, as I mentioned earlier, you have to monitor and manage your stress levels seriously. You need to get enough high-quality sleep because your circadian rhythm is affected by and does affect hormone levels. And last but not least, you want to control inflammation, whether that inflammation is perpetuated by refined and processed sugars and carbohydrates and saturated or trans fats or other pro-inflammatory influences in your life. They need to be looked at. Incorporating the use of herbs in your diet and healthy oils, omega-3 fatty acids, avocados, which are the monounsaturated fats, the omega-9 fats like olive oil, and consuming some sort of superfood products that contain many different phytonutrient nutraceuticals, which again have all of the types of effects upon hormones and weight loss that you want. They help to regulate the structure of receptors. Therefore, they help your body to more accurately manage fluctuating hormone levels. Again, that's managed by the receptors for these hormones being up or down regulated in proportion to the amount of hormones available. And then any other nutrition I tend to use for my patients regarding weight loss desires and hormones will depend on lots of other medical and health details. I hope this was of use to everyone. I certainly learned a lot thinking about it. My name is Dr. Michael Wald. You're listening to Ask the Blood Detective. I'll see you next Tuesday for another episode of Ask the Blood Detective. You can email me at info@blooddetective.com or say hello or take advantage of lots of the free materials on my website at drmichaelwald.com. My phone number is 914-552-1442. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.